The PSP promised console quality experiences in a handheld form, and for many titles it actually did deliver, but for every God of War Chains of Olympus, there were games that fell very flat, ill-conceived, poorly executed, or just the worst of all, completely boring. Today we're going to be looking at the worst rated PSP games, diving into what went wrong and why these titles landed near the bottom of the PSP's history. Now, some rules here: these are the 10 worst rated PSP games as per Metacritic. So for a game like Monochrome Racing, which was absolutely horrendous, it doesn't actually hold enough reviews to have an official Metascore, so it won't be in this list. To have an official Metascore, a game needs to have 4 or more reviews, so those will be the games we're looking at today. 10 of the lowest rated games on Metacritic with 4 or more reviews. So without further ado, let's get started. So let's begin with a game that sounds like it should have been gritty, intense, and dripping with that underground street energy of the early 2000s. Instead, it just kind of landed flat on its face. Street Supremacy released on PSP in 2005 or 2006, depending on where you lived in the world. It was developed by Genki and published by Konami. And this one, with the highest score, holds a 41 out of 100 on Metacritic, which still puts it firmly in the generally unfavourable reviews category, and when you look closer, it's not hard to see why. Now on paper, Street Supremacy actually sounds interesting. It isn't just a racing game, it tries to blend street racing with a kind of territory control strategy system. You're not just driving, you're managing crews, battling rival gangs, taking over districts, and climbing the urban hierarchy. It's an ambitious, kinda hybrid concept, racing mixed with tactical progression. Underground culture meets turn-based mechanics, but ambition alone, as we know from this channel, doesn't carry a game. The first major issue this game has is identity confusion. It never really decides what it wants to be. Is it a racing game, a strategy game, a management simulator, a street RPG? It kind of attempts all of them and masters none of them. When you jump into races, the driving mechanics kind of feel off, the steering is loose, but not in a satisfying arcadey kind of way. There's an awkward floatiness to vehicle handling, like your car is gliding rather than gripping, precision becomes difficult, corners feel unpredictable, and collisions lack any weight. For a game centered around street racing culture, the racing itself is surprisingly lifeless. And then there's the pacing. There's long load times, which are especially noticeable on a handheld system where it's literally designed for quick bursts of play. You'll sit through transitions that break immersion and drain momentum. But racing isn't the only problem. The strategy layer, where you manage gang members and attempt to dominate city districts, sounds kind of compelling. In theory, you recruit members, challenge rivals, and expand your influence. In practice, it feels very shallow and repetitive. There's minimal depth in the crew management, decisions don't feel particularly impactful, encounters play out in ways that don't meaningfully reward tactical thinking. It's basically mechanical rather than engaging, like going through motions instead of executing strategy. And the biggest sin overall is the fact that it's just kind of boring. It's not broken in spectacular fashion. I mean, yeah, the AI is kind of dumb, but it's not hilariously glitchy like other games I've looked at on the channel. It's just really dull. Visually, the game is serviceable but kind of bland, the city environments lack personality, the urban aesthetic feels generic rather than immersive, there's no distinctive flair to separate it from other mid-2000s street-themed games. One interesting note, although I wasn't able to test this myself, the multiplayer component, which could have added replay value, reportedly suffered from instability and some syncing issues. On paper, racing other players for turf sounds like a highlight, but in reality it sounds like it was inconsistent. What makes this game fascinating isn't that it's catastrophically terrible, like some of the other games we'll be looking at today, it's that it sits in this strange middle ground where you can see the skeleton of something quite good. The idea of blending strategy and racing isn't inherently flawed. In fact, modern games have successfully fused genres in bold ways. But those games commit to polish, they refine mechanics and sharpen identity. Street Supremacy feels like a prototype that left development way too early. The PSP had racers like Ridge Racer and Gran Turismo pushing impressive visuals and tight handling. When placed next to stronger titles, Street Supremacy's shortcomings become glaring. It's a game that aimed high conceptually but lacked the execution to support it. And that's how you land at a 41 out of 100. Now before we go any further, if you're a fan of retro gaming, classic games, or in this case terrible games, then please consider hitting that subscribe button, and if you haven't done so already, please consider hitting that like button. It makes a real difference, more than you probably would think. Anyway, let's move on to our next game. So next up is a title that occupies one of the most competitive genres in gaming, that's arcade racing, and somehow manages to strip away almost everything that makes that genre fun. So this is Pocket Racers. It was developed by Dark Energy Digital and released in 2006 and was once again published by Konami. Wow, they were really on a roll with their terrible racing games in 2005 and 6. This one holds a 39 out of 100, so let's find out why. At first glance, Pocket Racers seems harmless. Small cars, compact tracks, arcade vibes, it almost suggests a Micro Machines style experience, or even in the vein of Mad Tracks. Tight courses, chaotic overtakes that pick up and play energy. But within minutes, or even, well, seconds, cracks begin to show. Let's start with the controls. In racing games, controls are everything. You need responsiveness, you need confidence in steering input, you need a sense of weight and feedback, and Pocket Racers successfully delivers absolutely none of that. Cars feel very slippery, but in an unintentional way. The steering lacks precision. Instead of feeling like you're mastering a track, you're just constantly wrestling the game's weird physics engine. And when the physics feel unreliable, frustration sets in very quickly. And then there's the track design. Memorable racing games build identity through some pretty iconic courses. Dramatic curves, environmental hazards, verticality, or signature set pieces. Pocket Racers tracks all blur together. Environments lack detail, layouts feel uninspired and sometimes completely stupid. There's little escalation in complexity or creativity. Visually, you can see, it looks awful. It feels dated even by PSP standards at the time. The system was capable of some pretty strong graphical output, yet Pocket Racers looks flat and just has no energy. And also, the game starts waffling on about losing your soul or something when you lose a race and gaining souls when you win. I have no idea what the context is, and the game does little to no explanation as to what it's actually talking about, so I just completed some races and hoped that my soul wouldn't leave my body. Another issue with this game was the AI. The opponents don't really behave at all. There's a little sense of dramatic competition. Instead of tense photo finishes, you often experience detached mechanical races. The progression systems are thin, there's hardly any unlockables, and when you get them, they don't feel very rewarding. There's no compelling hook to keep you invested long term. And perhaps the worst of all, again, there's just no personality here, and it's just kind of boring. Great arcade racers inject some chaos, charm, or even humour into the experience. Whether it's vibrant art direction, exaggerated physics, whatever, but they create an identity. Pocket Racers just doesn't have anything. The audio design is bad, the engine sounds lack punch, the music doesn't energize. It's just background noise. Every part of this game is just sterile. The score of 39 reflects not a singular catastrophic flaw, but a consistent absence of excellence in every category. Nothing stands out. And in gaming, especially in crowded genres like this one, that mediocrity can be completely fatal. And exactly like Street Supremacy, Pocket Racers isn't infamous, it's not meme-worthy, and it didn't spark outrage. It's just a really, really boring game that existed briefly and faded. Okay, so now we move into the more controversial territory, and away from racing games. This is Dead or Alive Paradise, and this game holds a Metascore of 38. This was developed by Project Venus and published by Tecmo Koei, and released exclusively on the PSP in 2010. It is of course a spin-off from the larger Dead or Alive franchise, which is primarily known for some pretty fast-paced and very enjoyable 3D fighting. but Dead or Alive Paradise is not a fighting game. It's more of a go-on-holiday simulator built around mini-games, relationship mechanics, and beachside activities. You arrive on a tropical island, you interact with characters, you play volleyball, you participate in mini-games, and you unlock swimsuits and cosmetics. It's like Dead or Alive Gooner Edition. On the surface, it resembles earlier Dead or Alive Extreme titles, but there's like zero gameplay depth, and it's just kinda dull. First, the mechanics. Volleyball, which is one of the core activities, feels very simplified and very repetitive. There's little strategic variation, and the matches become very repetitive, boring, and whatever else you want to say, very quickly. The minigames lack any substance, and they kind of feel like filler rather than meaningful, and the game has little to nothing in it already, so having the minigames feel like filler in an empty game just is not good at all. The relationship mechanics, which involve giving gifts and interacting with characters to build affinity, feel very shallow as well. The dialogue options lack any depth, and the outcomes just kind of feel arbitrary. Critics noted that progression felt very grind-heavy. You repeat similar activities to unlock cosmetic rewards, but without compelling gameplay to justify repetition. And then there's the presentation. While the PSP handles the character models fairly well, environments lack any vibrancy. Compared to console entries, it feels scaled down, and that's understandably so, but there's not enough refinement to compensate for that. Tone is another problem. The game leans too heavily into fan service without delivering engaging gameplay to support it. When spectacle overshadows substance, well, you can expect criticism to follow. It's worth noting that Dead or Alive Paradise isn't universally despised. I've seen some fans appreciate its niche appeal, but it did land at 38 out of 100 on Metacritic. And the core issue is, of course, it just doesn't have any mechanical depth. If you strip away the aesthetics and, the Gooner vibes, what's left? Not very much. Dead or Alive Paradise serves as a reminder that spin-offs must stand on gameplay, not just brand recognition. And on PSP, where the space was limited and players expected, strong, portable experiences, shallow systems like this stand out so much. So next up, we are going to be looking at a fighting game. Licensed fighting games have a rough history. For every surprise hit, there are several titles that feel rushed, underfunded, or simply unsure of how to translate their source material into, well, a good game. Enter Legend of the Dragon, a PSP fighting game based on the animated TV show of the same name. And this game has a very lovely score of 38 out of 100. At its core, Legend of the Dragon attempts to deliver a traditional one-on-one fighting experience. You choose a character, engage in battles, unleash special moves if you can figure out how to do so, and you can climb through story or arcade-style modes. It's a simple formula in a proven genre. But these kind of games, well, they live and die by precision. And that's where things start to kind of, unfold. From the moment the combat begins, responsiveness just doesn't feel right. Attacks don't always flow naturally into combos, or at all. Timing feels inconsistent, hit detection sometimes doesn't work, and punches that look like they connect don't always register at all, or with any feedback. And in a fighting game, feedback really is everything. I mean, look guys, the gameplay speaks for itself, look at this shit. You need impact, you need weight, you need that sense that each move carries force. Without it, combat just feels hollow and, to be honest, completely pointless. This is a really clunky game. Animations are stiff, the transitions lack any kind of fluidity, and character movements just feel really awkward rather than remotely dynamic. Instead of smooth martial arts choreography, encounters often devolve into awkward exchanges of very basic punching or kicking. I only played as a couple of characters in my time here, but they basically felt exactly the same, and these were two completely different sized characters. In strong fighting games, each character feels distinct. Different pacing, different combo chains, different strengths and weaknesses, you know how it goes. Here, this roster just feels like it lacks any mechanical diversity. They're just all the same. And then there's no depth, and for casual players, simplicity isn't really a bad thing. but Legend of the Dragon doesn't feel intentionally streamlined, it just feels incredibly underdeveloped. There's like no advanced mechanics, and once you've learned to basically punch and kick, you've seen what the entire game has to offer. There is no skill ceiling because it is in fact a floor that you're walking on. So there's like no replay value as a result. I mean, visually, do I even need to say anything? It doesn't look good. It doesn't capitalize on the PSP's capabilities at all. The backgrounds are functional, but arenas feel kind of empty. The character models are kind of rubbish, and they have like no personality. If you were a fan of this show, this game definitely would have been an absolute stab to the chest. Licensed games have a built-in advantage to them: emotional investment. And if you love the source material, you would already be sold on this game, but, you know, if it's going to work, you've got to actually capture the spirit of the world that you're taking the source material from. And that's where Legend of the Dragon really seems to struggle. The show had stylized action and elemental powers, and in theory that opens the door to some pretty cool special attacks and unique movesets. But in practice, it's just not here. Presentation is meh, special effects are meh, damaging is meh, the whole thing is just rubbish, to be honest. The game had some story elements, but they don't really give you any context. I've personally never seen the show outside of watching a few clips whilst making this video, but I didn't see the show or the clips before playing the game, so I literally had no idea what was going on. The worst part is, it's not even like it's outrageously broken, like there's no goofy glitches or tech disasters that I was expecting to find, especially this far into our list, but it's just another complete train wreck that lacks any personality, depth, fun, colour, excitement. I can keep going, guys. The point is, this is a 38 out of 100 game for a reason. This has got to be one of the most dull, boring fighting games I've ever played in my life. I would take PlayStation All-Stars and give that thing 100 out of 100 any day of the week before anyone could force me to sit and play this game again. Horrible. Okay, so next up we've got a licensed movie tie-in game. Napoleon Dynamite the Game, which holds a 37 out of 100. Adapting comedy into video games, you know, sounds kinda difficult. Comedy thrives on timing, delivery, awkward pauses, and subtle performances, and those elements don't always tend to translate well into interactive systems. And few films are as dependent on awkward charm as Napoleon Dynamite. Which, by the way, released in 2004, 3 years before this game arrived on the PSP. Why was this ever made? Because it wasn't exactly a massive hit, it's more of a cult classic. I mean, on paper, adapting this world into a quirky minigame collection was probably the best choice they could make. The movie itself is episodic, scenes revolve around everyday absurdities, but the execution is everything. The PSP takes that minigame approach, which presents itself as a collection of short activities inspired by events in the film. You'll engage in tetherball matches, deliver items, complete some random challenges. The problem is there's like no cohesion. There's no larger narrative arc or meaningful progression system, so you literally just play through like 6 minigames, I think. And the minigames, to be honest, none of them are particularly good. The game opens with a very boring and quite long dragged out rhythm dance section, which just immediately took me back to sitting through the Little Mermaid section in Kingdom Hearts, which is not a good memory. There's one where you have to feed a llama that kind of turns into this game that almost looks like tennis. You're throwing food at the llama's spitting stuff back at you. You can also throw a raccoon at it to distract it, or throw a boot to hit it in the face. You know, what fun, I guess. There's also like an old arcade style shooter minigame, that was okay, it functioned. And honestly, beyond that, I couldn't tell you what I actually played. The minigames, basically they vary in quality, but they all share a very common flaw. They're all very shallow. They don't evolve, they don't deepen, there's nothing surprising. You complete one, you move on, and you don't revisit it. In comedy, repetition can be quite funny, but in gameplay, repetition, like that especially, is just so draining. And would you believe that awkward humour just doesn't land the same way that it does in the film? Who would have guessed that? Visually, the game attempts to kind of replicate the film's aesthetic, but the character models appear simplified and somewhat stiff. They kind of look like really budget South Park characters, to be honest. The environments are minimal. There's an underlying sense that the devs weren't sure how to build mechanics around the film's identity, so they just leaned on minigame variety instead. I mean, I think the worst part about this is that people were paid to make this and someone actually paid money to buy this. There's just nothing redeeming here. It's awful, the minigames are all rubbish, the visuals are rubbish, the sound is rubbish. The whole idea of this game from the start is just complete rubbish. It's like making a game out of Little Britain. Completely pointless slop that no one ever should have had to play. Or develop, for that matter. I'm trying to think of a comparison that I could make to if this were to happen today, and I just can't think of something. It would be like, I don't know, making a video game out of some Mark Wahlberg direct-to-Netflix streaming slop film, waiting 3 years and then releasing it as a minigame collection. That's what this is. It's just a complete waste of time. Alright, so moving away from movie tie-in games, let's talk about a game called Pocket Pool. Sometimes the simplest concepts are the hardest to execute perfectly. Pool, at its core, is about physics, precision, and subtle control. It's a genre that does in fact demand accuracy. So when Pocket Pool launched on PSP and earned also a Metacritic score of 37, well, I'm sure I don't need to say anything else. But of course I'm going to, because otherwise the video would be quite short. So on the surface, Pocket Pool appears straightforward, various pool modes, adjustable shots. You know, it's just a portable pool experience. It sounds harmless, but the moment you begin lining up shots, well, the cracks start to appear. The physics are just a bit off, to be honest. In pool simulation, the ball behaviour must feel at least a bit authentic. The angles must respond a bit realistically, or you know, just realistically. Spin must translate, momentum must decay convincingly. But the problem is, in Pocket Pool, none of those things really happen. Shots that look properly lined up just behave unpredictably, ball collisions lack that satisfying tactile realism, precision aiming just feels awkward. The PSP's control scheme is capable of delivering subtle input, but the interface doesn't always cooperate with that control scheme. Adjusting shot power and angle just feels a bit fiddly rather than straightforward and intuitive. Camera positioning does complicate matters further, because most of the angles just make it really difficult to judge alignment accurately, which is just really frustrating. This is literally a pool game, how could you not get some good camera angles? The presentation is minimalistic, but it's definitely not a stylistic choice. It just didn't have the budget or something, or they just gave up. The menus feel basic, visual polish is limited, there's little flair to make the experience engaging beyond its core mechanics and the occasional JPEG image of a woman that appears on screen. Or maybe two, if you're lucky. It's very 2000s. And when your core mechanics are under scrutiny, the presentation matters even more. To be honest, I really don't have as much to say about Pocket Pool as I do some of the other games, because it's literally just a poorly made pool game. There's not really anything else to say about it. It's not good, there's nothing exciting, so let's just move on. Oh yes, we are back on some movie tie-in games. When you hear the words Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, well, I'm sure some expectations may come to mind. Fast combat, some good movement, personality, humour, teamwork, chaos, pizza, you know. So when the PSP adaptation of the 2007 TMNT animated film launched, and reached a 37, well, let's just say there was some confusion, because on paper this should have worked. The 2007 film had a slightly darker tone than previous Turtle adaptations. It focused more heavily on fractured relationships between the brothers, especially Leo and Raph, and that emotional tension could have translated beautifully into character switching mechanics or some layered combat systems. Instead, what you got was a fairly basic kind of platforming combat hybrid that rarely evolves beyond its opening level. So let's start with the combat. Really, a Turtles game lives or dies on how good it feels to fight, and I can confirm that it does not feel good to fight. It is literally a case of button mash the same button, and you maybe press it 3 times in a row, and that's your entire moveset. You barely feel any impact, it's hard to lock onto enemies, the whole thing is just kind of rough. The enemy reactions are minimal, the combat animations don't look very good. Instead of feeling like elite martial artists, they just feel like stiff action figures of themselves. And don't even get me started on the movement, because when you're not fighting, you're platforming from place to place. but you can't actually control your movement properly. You have to just press a corresponding button to jump, so you would press triangle to jump forward, square to go left, circle to go right, and occasionally you may have to hold down the X button if you're swinging or sliding. It's really, really boring. The most exciting part is when you press them quick enough where you can look like you're just doing everything quickly. That's literally it. Moving fast, kind of, is the most exciting part of this entire game. I will say that the couple of cutscenes that I saw were pretty good, but I'm pretty sure they're just clips taken from the film, not specifically designed for this game. Visually, the game attempts to mimic that stylized look of the film. The character models are recognizable, but on this console, oh my goodness, they do not look good. The environments don't look good. The color palettes feel like a Zack Snyder film. There's just not much that I can praise here, or in fact, there's not anything I can praise here. The sound design is underwhelming, the voice clips are limited, combat effects lack any punch, and your punches lack any punch, and the soundtrack just doesn't elevate any tension or excitement. And the worst part is there's just no personality. These are 4 Ninja Turtles. How is there no personality here? There's hardly any interactions between them, and when there is, it feels incredibly dull, muted, and boring. The 37 Metascore reflects this, to be honest. Repetitive combat, bland level design, terrible controls, underwhelming presentation, and just missed potential. TMNT 2007 tie-in game is just not good. It's not worth playing. I don't know about the console versions, but this PSP port is absolutely horrendous, and definitely deserves that score. Okay, so now we're going much further back in time, to World War II. I didn't really know how to make that transition work. How do you go from Ninja Turtles to World War II? Anyway, flight combat games, well, they demand a delicate balance. They need to convey speed without disorientation, complexity without confusion, and strategy without sluggishness. Air Conflict's Aces of World War II aimed to bring historical aerial combat to the PSP, and unfortunately it crash-landed at 36 on Metacritic, making this officially the 3rd lowest reviewed game on the PSP. Anyway, at first glance, the premise sounds promising. You take on missions inspired by World War II, piloting era-appropriate aircraft through dogfights, bombing runs, training missions. There's historical framing, campaign progression, multiple planes from different countries to unlock. It's pretty ambitious, especially for a handheld title. But of course, as what usually happens, ambition quickly collides with execution. The first major complaint for me is the controls. The flight mechanics feel very heavy, and not in a realistic simulation sense, but just in a dull, annoying way. Planes respond very slowly to input, adjusting altitude and direction at the same time can feel very awkward. Dogfights should feel tense and exhilarating, but they often just end very quickly, and when they don't, they're just very repetitive. Enemy AI doesn't behave dynamically enough to create memorable encounters. Instead of unpredictable aerial duels, missions frequently boil down to chasing similarly behaving targets across wide open skies. And the mission structure just compounds that issue. Objectives repeat frequently: escort this plane, destroy these targets, patrol this area. Repetition itself isn't inherently bad, but without escalating the complexity or dramatic variation, all the missions just kind of blur together. Now, another problem is the visual presentation. While the PSP wasn't built to rival console visuals, it of course was capable of a pretty good output, especially when optimized. Air Conflict suffers from muddy textures, planes and environments that lack detail, skies feel empty, terrain below looks simplistic. The whole thing just undermines the immersion. The sound design is similarly underwhelming. One time when I booted the game up, the audio glitched entirely, but when it does work, the engine noises lack depth, explosions and bullets don't feel impactful, the soundtrack doesn't remotely increase tension during combat. The whole thing is just underwhelming. The sense of speed, which is, quite crucial in a planes game, feels very diminished. Movement across the map doesn't generate the adrenaline one expects from this kind of combat. In fact, there are several points where I was so bored I just controlled the plane with my left hand and just sat and scrolled on my phone, had a drink in the other. It was just completely pointless and a waste of time. The progression system attempts to introduce variety with new aircrafts and upgrades, but the core loop doesn't change. And when that core loop doesn't change, extra content like more planes can only really go so far. And that 36 score really reflects a pattern here. Solid concept, incredibly weak execution. And a very ugly execution at that. I mean, hey, on the plus side, this inspired me to return to War Thunder again, so thanks Air Conflicts, I appreciate that a lot. I will enjoy the plane game that actually kind of works. Alright, so stick here with me guys, we are nearly in the home stretch. We are now at the second to worst game on the PSP, at least in terms of metascores. So we are now moving away from air combat to extreme sports. And extreme sports games were very popular in the early 2000s. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater dominated skateboarding, SSX brought arcade snowboarding energy, and BMX titles were trying to capture that same trick chaining magic. So this is Dave Mirra BMX Challenge, and this game tried to bring that energy to the PSP, and unfortunately ended up with a 32 out of 100 on Metacritic. So let's find out why. The foundation of a great extreme sports game is flow. Movement must feel smooth, tricks must chain fluidly, and controls must encourage experimentation whilst not being too complicated. In Dave Mirra BMX Challenge, flow is disrupted almost immediately and consistently. The controls feel incredibly stiff, the transitions between tricks lack that fluidity, landing mechanics sometimes feel inconsistent, leading to frustrating wipeouts that don't always feel earned. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't very good at the game, so sometimes it was my fault, but my god, sometimes it really wasn't. Level design also lacks creativity. Great trick-based games build some really fun playgrounds, environments designed to encourage creative routes and daring lines, but the environments here just feel flat and underdeveloped. There are ramps, rails, and some obstacles, but they rarely connect in ways that actually invite some cool combos. Obviously this was compared unfavourably to Tony Hawk titles because it lacked the depth and the personality of those games. The trick variety is very limited, the customization options don't really enhance gameplay at all, the progression systems fail to introduce anything new or exciting, and visually, whilst this isn't the worst looking game in this list, the game doesn't exactly stand out either. The character models are very bland, the environments are very bland, the sound design, would you guess, is also quite bland. You know, extreme sports games thrive on some iconic, energetic soundtracks. Music that amplifies adrenaline, or at least is cool. I mean look, Skate 3 is one of my favourite games ever, and the soundtrack on that goes unbelievably hard. I don't remember anything about the soundtrack in this game, and I literally played it like an hour ago. The audio completely fails to compensate for any of the mechanical shortcomings in the game. The worst part about it all is the game just feels completely lifeless, there's nothing extreme about it. The only extreme thing about Dave Mirra BMX Challenge is that it's an extremely large waste of time. It is restrained, it's repetitive, it's kinda ugly, and you know, it scored 32 for a reason. And you know, it's not the worst PSP game, but it comes dangerously close. And so that brings us nicely to our final game. We made it, guys. And at the very bottom of this list, the lowest rated PSP game of all time, sits Dragonball Evolution with a crushingly depressing score of 28. To understand why this landed so low, you're gonna need some context. Dragon Ball is of course one of the most iconic anime and manga franchises in the world. For decades it's been associated with explosive battles, gravity-defying movement, planet-shattering energy beams, and dramatic transformations. The series thrives on speed, spectacle, and emotional intensity. And in 2009, the live-action film Dragon Ball Evolution attempted to reinterpret that universe for Hollywood. And of course, I'm sure you know the story, the film was critically panned and flopped. And then along came the tie-in game. Now movie tie-in games already face an uphill battle. Development timelines are often quite tight, and budgets are often quite restrained. And your creative freedom is limited by the source material, for the most part. But even within those constraints, quality is definitely possible. I mean, look at the movie tie-in games for Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, and Return of the King. Those games slap beyond belief. Dragonball Evolution, unfortunately, feels like a project that never had the time or resources to fully develop. At its core, this PSP game is a fighting game. One-on-one battles, selectable characters, special moves, health bars. On the surface, that's exactly what a Dragon Ball game should be. But almost immediately, problems will surface. Let's begin with the responsiveness of the combat. In a franchise built around lightning-fast fighting and energy clashes, responsiveness must be razor sharp. Inputs need to translate pretty much instantly, combos need to flow, and movements need to feel fluid and aggressive. But here, of course, would you believe, the combat feels very stiff. Attacks do not chain naturally, animations lack smooth transitions, movements feel delayed, almost like there's this tiny layer of friction between you pressing a button and the on-screen action. And the problem is that friction, well, it accumulates. Instead of feeling powerful, fights feel restrained. And then there's the issue of depth. Much like Legend of the Dragon, the movesets are limited, each character has a small pool of attacks and special abilities. After a few matches, again, you've basically seen everything the combat system has to offer. There's no room for mastery, no combo trees, no advanced mechanics to experiment. Once again, this is a skill ceiling so low that I don't even want to say you'll be walking on it anymore, it would be underground. In stronger Dragon Ball games, even earlier handheld entries, players could explore timing, positioning, energy management, transformation mechanics, but Evolution just strips most of that away and takes a massive shit on it. Presentation also struggles. Character models resemble their live-action counterparts rather than the anime versions, and of course, that alone is already a problem. I mean, I guess they didn't know that at the time, but of course now that's definitely a problem. And of course, yes, it aligns with the film, but it clashes with what you'd expect from a Dragon Ball fighting experience. Visually, the arenas feel small and empty, there's limited environmental interaction, explosions lack spectacle, energy blasts just don't carry the same sense of impact or scale seen in other entries in this series. And of course, again, the sound design follows suit. I feel like I sound like a broken record at this point because most of these games all have the same problems. The bottom line is, Dragon Ball fights are supposed to feel larger than life. Characters move at impossible speeds, energy waves tear through landscapes, and transformations should shift the whole atmosphere. But in this game, it just feels really grounded and subdued. And everything about the game just feels rushed. The menus are basic, the modes are limited, the story progression closely mirrors the film, and the film was awful, so the narrative foundation wasn't really strong to begin with. Without deep mechanics or any expansive content, there's literally no reason to revisit this after you complete it, if you can even complete it at all. So looking back at these 10 titles, well, a pattern has definitely emerged. The thing is, none of them are really famous for any spectacular technical failures, and most aren't completely unplayable. They all just have these things in common. They have shallow mechanics, repetitive rubbish design, weak presentation, and to be honest, missed potential. The PSP was capable of some really good experiences. It delivered visually impressive races, deep RPGs, some pretty cool puzzle games, and ambitious action titles. But these were, well, none of those things. Handheld development also came with constraints, tight budgets, compressed timelines, and experimental ideas that didn't always stick the landing. And unfortunately for these 10 games, they represent that lower end of the spectrum. Not because they lacked ideas, but because those ideas just weren't fully realised, or realised at all. So thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, and if you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe and tap that bell for notifications to stay up to date with my future uploads. A massive shout out to my Patreon subscribers for the continued support, and all I really have left to say is thanks and goodbye.